I need an ambulance.
And what is going on?
Somebody came in and shot my boyfriend. He's down on the floor right now.
Where's the person that did this to him?
I don't know. He took off.
All right, hey, everyone get over here. Hey, buddy, can you hear me?
With you.
House police, anybody in here make yourself known?
On blood. Give me a chest seal. This is not looking good. He's fixing the all in here.
For those most affected by a homicide,
It just seemed like it was some terrible nightmare that I couldn't wake up from.
the first 48 is just the beginning.
See what we got.
With the sheer number of shots, is that a targeted attack?
I woke up to him in my room.
I'm thinking he's trying to kill witnesses. The missing piece was his name.
This is the story of the fight for justice.
I knew this was going to be an identification case.
Nobody saw his face.
You see me, your cash?
In the weeks, months, and years.
Can we go to a jury, get a guilty verdict, and get...
What's up, guys?
All right, we have a guy shot multiple times. Shooting happened upstairs.
When I got this case, I had only been a homicide detective for 7 months, so I was still fairly new to the unit. There was going to be a lot of pressure, but I just trusted my squad mates to lead me in the right direction and just trusted myself. Know this guy's name?
Cameron.
29-year-old Cameron Reisner was born in Colorado Springs and was a graduate of the Tulsa Job Corps. He leaves behind his mother, brother, a young daughter, and extended family.
How many times has he shot? One here.
Cameron suffered 8 gunshot wounds in his leg, arm, and torso.
See what we got.
Case master case.
Okay.
Shooting happened to the right.
All right.
There's a casing right there. There's another casing.
Just by the sheer amount of shell casings that were found, this was someone going into this apartment and trying to kill everyone inside of there.
The recovered casings are all 9mm.
It looks like he might have been shot in a bed.
Most likely close range.
But why it happened, who was involved, there's a lot more questions than answers at this point. So we have a lot of groundwork to do.
Was he here by himself when he was shot?
No, girlfriend, daughter, and roommate all here.
I was happy that there was witnesses that I could interview. I needed to figure out what happened inside of the apartment so I could start generating a lead on a potential suspect.
Back at headquarters,
Patricia was Cameron's girlfriend. All right, hun. I'm gonna have to ask some difficult questions. I decided to interview Patricia first because I assumed that she would have been the person closest to Cameron, and she would be able to shed some light as to what was going on around the time that he died. How long have you known Cameron?
I've known Cameron for about 3.5 years.
Okay. What address do you stay at?
I was evicted from my apartment.
Patricia says she and her daughter recently moved in with Cameron at their friend Juan's duplex apartment.
So is Juan, was he friends with Cameron or family members or?
They was just friends.
Okay, so tell me what led up to what happened tonight.
I want to say probably about 4 o'clock this evening. Cameron's friend from the apartment complex had somebody with him.
She says they heard Cameron's friend and another man enter downstairs.
Okay, who were they there to see?
I have no idea. Cameron went downstairs, and me and my daughter were upstairs. Cameron comes back upstairs. Cameron just said, "Oh boy, sucker punched him." I said, "Have you ever seen that person before? Who is he?" And he said, "I've never seen him."
At that point, I'm not sure what the motive is.
But whatever that initial argument was about is likely going to be the motive for what happens to Cameron that night. Usually it's not a coincidence that something earlier in the day leads to something that happened that night.
Tell me about the fight that happened.
He just said that, oh boy, said to him, why is it in the last 3 places somebody always there? And Cameron said, what are you talking, that's weird. You know, if he's going to people's house, ain't someone supposed to be there? And then Cameron said, I turned and oh boy came out and sucker punched me. And they turned around and walked out. Cameron just brushed it off. We went about our day. We went to sleep, and I woke up to this guy standing there. He was rummaging through the stuff.
She says the man was looking through their belongings.
Cameron jumped up, and next thing, oh boy, pistol whipped him.
With the suspect rummaging around, it's as if he's looking for something. So you start thinking burglary, robbery, but then with the sheer number of shots to Cameron, is that a targeted attack?
Cameron's gun was sitting on the edge of the bed behind Cameron. And oh boy said, oh yeah, and he picked it up.
Picked up Cameron's gun?
Uh-huh.
What kind of gun did Cameron have?
It was a Smith & Wesson 9.
She says Cameron had customized the gun grip with a blue bandana inlay.
Okay. So what happens after that?
The dude went in the hallway and he told Juan, this is for homage. Y'all's not paying y'all's dues. He punched Juan and oh boy left. Me and Juan go into my daughter's room and check on her. And we hear him come back. Seems like seconds in my head.
Okay.
And he comes back and we heard the click, click. And I hear him cock the gun. He shot it 3 or 4 times.
She says the gunfire came from Cameron's room.
And then he came into my daughter's room. Me and Juan are behind the door. And he reaches like this and I can see the gun and I see his hand. And he shoots. Well, me and Juan are basically like shoving the door shut.
Okay.
And he ran downstairs.
When she tells me that he had left and came back and that's when he shot Cameron and tried to kill her daughter, I'm thinking, well, he's trying to kill witnesses. He doesn't want to be recognized. Describe everything that this guy looked like.
I couldn't see his face. He had an orange ski mask on that only the eyes and the mouth is out of. He had on some overalls that were camouflaged.
Okay. I'm gonna keep you out here. I'm gonna talk to your daughter.
3 hours in.
Walking into any interview with a child is difficult, and there's really no soft approach you can take for someone who's been through what her daughter had been through. Okay, sweetie. Tell me about what happened today.
I don't know what all happened. I was asleep. I woke up to him in my room.
The witnesses were in different areas of the apartment. They could watch the same event and all describe it somewhat differently. So we're going to get pieces of the story from each one and put them together.
I wasn't saying nothing, I was quiet. But he said if I don't shut up, he was gonna shoot me. I think he grabbed my backpack. I heard him yelling, like in the hallway. He said something, Juan, if you don't tell me where that phone is, I'm gonna shoot you. And he said, I don't have the phone, it's broken. And then he goes downstairs.
The suspect's calling Juan by name, asking for a phone. It makes it very clear there's some prior interaction, likely, and it just gives that confidence that Juan's going to know who this is.
Patricia's daughter says moments later, Juan and her mom came rushing in.
And then he comes back after like 2 minutes, and then I heard like shots go off. He shot at Cameron first like 2 to 3 times. And then he came around my room and aimed the gun at me. And he shot. And then he hurried up and ran off after my mom and Juan shut the door in his face.
I think he fired until he ran out of bullets and he had no more. And we're very fortunate that Patricia's daughter is still here. Okay. Have you seen this guy ever before? Did you see Cameron with a gun tonight?
I know.
Okay.
But I feel like I got shot, almost got shot by his gun.
She says when the suspect came back to her room, the gun he fired looked like Cameron's.
He got like a blue bandana on the grip.
That made me believe that the suspect had stolen Cameron's gun from him and possibly killed him with his own gun. I definitely wanted to find that gun because if I can find the weapon, then hopefully I can find the suspect.
Before Lansdowne could try to get more information from Cameron's roommate, Juan.
Hang on. Hello? I was called by a patrol officer who told me that they were hearing a possible street name of Pork Chop for the suspect.
He was someone who had been causing problems in the complex, so there's a good possibility that Pork Chop is going to be related to this investigation.
The suspect left the apartment, and then he came back and he killed Cameron and he tried to kill a child. We knew that we needed to get him in custody as quickly as possible.
This is Cameron's final resting place. My dad is buried over in that area with my grandparents on the Reisner side. I have a sister buried here. It gives me peace knowing that he's surrounded by family. Cameron was my oldest nephew. He was 3 weeks older than my first child. So my life was changing and growing, and he was coming into the world in the same process. He was just a bundle of joy the minute he came into my life. Cameron liked to make people laugh. He did not like to see people down. That night, my phone rang at 9:05 p.m. My sister called me to tell me that Cameron had been murdered. That night was hell. He was only 29 years old. He was robbed. He was robbed from getting to see his daughter walk across the graduation stage. He was robbed from getting to give her away at her own wedding. And Patricia's daughter, Cameron, was a best friend to her. He made sure that she had someone that she could confide in, no matter what it was. She was devastated. There's no closure. There is no goodbye. It just seemed like it was some terrible nightmare that I couldn't wake up from.
I don't know the first name of who Pork Chop is.
4 hours into the investigation.
I have a street name, which is good. However, I was not able to identify this person. So now, moving forward, I'm going to ask witnesses about Pork Chop. All right, let's go talk to Juan. Tell me about what happened tonight.
I know somebody came upstairs.
Where are you at in the house when this happens? And so what happened next?
And me and Trish went into Bug's room. And that's when Cam got shot.
You said Bug? Is that her daughter?
Yeah.
Okay. And what happened after Cameron got shot?
Then me and Trish managed to push him out the door, and he went away.
Juan was interesting. He is very calm, almost nonchalant. It's evident that he's not just volunteering information, just giving the bare minimum.
Listen, man, your friend got killed tonight.
No.
I need to freaking know everything that happened and what this guy said to you.
He was just saying that we better start hanging up on.
Why?
I don't know.
Juan, look at me.
Juan, sit up.
You know exactly why he was at your apartment today.
No, I don't.
Juan's demeanor really frustrated me. I felt like I was dragging information from him and having to ask him questions I should not have had to ask. almost like I was wasting his time. I don't know if it was because he didn't want to be involved or if he was scared as well. What did you owe him?
I guess my phone. What are you talking about, my phone?
Because why?
I guess because somebody else's phone went missing.
I think you could infer just from his reluctance to share that maybe there's an allegation that he's responsible for that phone going missing and doesn't want to take the blame for what happened.
Now we're getting somewhere, and I feel like I'm pulling information out of you when your friend's the one that died. Who's Pork Chop? Pork Chop. I need to know who he is.
Person who killed him.
How do you know that this Pork Chop guy shot Cameron tonight?
Okay, yeah.
So you recognize his voice.
Mm-hmm.
What does he look like?
All
right, and does he have any tattoos?
Like that.
What's it look like?
Jojo.
Okay, tell me about the fight that Cameron got in earlier today.
Well, he just punched them.
Okay, so he actually told you that Pork Chop was the one who punched him?
Juan tells detectives the name of Cameron's friend from the complex who brought Pork Chop to the apartment that afternoon.
Okay. It was very important for me to find this friend just because I knew that there was a very high likelihood that that person could tell me who Pork Chop was.
Here's the tenant list.
The team looks up the address for Cameron's friend.
It's gonna be him.
All right, we're gonna go knock on his door.
Let's do it. All right.
Gotta make sure that you're ready to pick up Pork Chop because that may be where he's at.
The team heads back to the complex.
If you two want to take Lacey in the front, Linda and I'll go to the back.
I knew that Pork Chop was incredibly dangerous, so I absolutely do not think that Pork Chop would have hesitated to shoot at law enforcement.
Doors, please.
When we went back to the apartment complex to try to find Cameron's friend, there was a very high likelihood that Pork Chop could actually be at the apartment. And there's a very high level of danger there. So we all were ready to go. I had my vest on. What's up, man? Can you show me your hands and make sure I don't have a gun? Thank you. You're not in trouble, but we gotta talk.
7 hours in, the team transports Cameron's friend to headquarters.
The missing piece to finding and stopping Pork Chop was his government name. Cameron was killed today. He was murdered tonight. And I think you know why. I know that you were there earlier today. So tell me what happened.
I woke up early this morning, looking for some weed, you know? And this guy, I had never seen him before in my life. I mean, but I did get some weed from him or whatever.
So who's the guy?
I know they just call him, like, Pork Chop.
You said he was just walking around in the apartment complex.
He said he had nowhere to go. He was like, you know, he was like, just help me out. He said he was hungry. I gave him a bottle of water, gave him some, you know, food. And then all of a sudden, he started following me, like, everywhere. He's like, bro, you know somebody, you know, I can, you know, get this weed, sell it to whatever. So we stopped by, you know, Cam. So it was Cam's weed or whatever. You trying to get some tree, bro? And he was like, no, I already got some or whatever. Dude, like, I guess pushed him. Like, I don't know what the he was on, but he like overamped and hyper. I could run these apartments, whatever.
He describes some interactions between Pork Chop and other residents where Pork Chop just flying off the handle. So it's a very volatile situation.
If I could like, get him out of Rose's apartment.
The friend says they left Cameron's and went back to his own apartment.
Then, you know what I mean, he started trying to like bully me or whatever. I'm like, bro, you can't stay here.
You see him go to anybody's place at all? Cameron. He's dead. You're saying he's your best friend. Help me out a little bit here. I need to know everything you know about this guy.
Trying the best I can. I mean, he used my phone.
He used your phone to call someone. Who did he call?
His sister.
Okay, I need to get that phone number.
Cameron's friend agrees to turn over his phone.
Give me just a minute. I wanted to get that phone number so that I could put it in our police database to figure out an identity of the person that he called. They 100% were going to know who he was. Can you run a phone number for me, please?
Sergeant Schilling runs the number Porkchop called from the friend's phone.
I need to figure out who this chick is. Please let this be gold.
They get the name of a woman.
How recent is that?
It's kind of older. It's like we're down in the 30th percentile on their guesstimations.
This girl likely is not going to have this phone number anymore.
I was not surprised that he was not able to identify the person at the end of that phone number, but I was still hoping that some way, somehow, we would figure out who it was.
The next day.
Hey, Lacey.
So this girl is actually a really good witness. I went back to the complex because I wanted to see things in the daytime, and I found a new witness who told me that Porkchop had actually been at the apartment that she was at the day prior to Cameron getting murdered. She said this guy shows up. He was just extremely disrespectful, was talking about how he's gonna straighten everybody up. He was extremely aggressive. He had actually punched someone. He had pistol whipped someone, and so there was at least 2 other victims of Porkchop within the 24 hours that led up to Cameron being murdered. She described what his tattoo looked like on the side of his neck. Said it looked like that.
It was kind of a unique, just weird pattern, but large and very identifiable. That is a great piece of information.
I mean, those tattoos and that street name, it's just odd that nobody knows who this guy is.
But we need his name. We can't just get an arrest warrant for Porkchop.
"34 hours in.
When we have a phone number that we don't know who actually owns it, kind of a last resort is just calling it.
Hello?
Hi, can I speak to please? And they hung up.
It's very frustrating. You're just looking for that one piece, and you keep hitting dead ends and roadblocks.
So, something else I just thought of that. We didn't check the jail website, like the jail calls.
That's a good idea. Run these phone numbers now.
The jail database, it's gonna tell you who's calling that number, because they're incarcerated and we have their name.
Okay, so somebody by the name of Johnny Clark, inmate Johnny Clark, made 4 phone calls to this phone number on, looks like today.
23-year-old Johnny Clark was booked into Sapulpa jail for possession of a firearm after police responded to a call of vandalism at a local hotel.
7 hours after the murder. Holy shit. When I saw his picture, I knew immediately that that's who the suspect was.
Is that your guy?
When I saw the booking photo, I was elated. I saw the huge tattoo on the left side of his neck. I saw the teardrop tattoo. Possession of a firearm.
Oh my gosh, what
All right, we've got Johnny Lee Clark. I now had a name to someone that I believe was Porkchop, and I was really happy that he was already in jail. He could not hurt anybody else. Now I wanted him to talk.
35 hours in. Lansdowne has Johnny Clark transported to homicide.
I was hoping that I would get a confession. I was hoping that at the very least I could put him at the scene. All right, so tell me why you were arrested.
I was smoking a little rocks. I'm blowing the smoke out the door. But I look to the left, I see 5 police coming. Well, I was really intoxicated. I was on 7 different drugs. I was cooperating. He was like, you got these weapons on you. Yeah, first I said no. Then I ended up in Superior County.
Okay. For what, though?
They said that pistols was found in my room. I don't know where.
It can be very difficult when you're interviewing a suspect, trying to know when to apply pressure or release. He's got quite a few things that he's throwing out there that Lacey has to kind of work her way through to get to the goal line.
You had said you were on 7 different kinds of drugs.
Heroin, methamphetamine, PCP, weed, liquor.
So what happened that got you to that point, John?
My mama kicked me out. She didn't want to be around me until I started taking my pills again.
Okay.
You know, just getting out of prison and stuff.
Johnny says he served 5 years for robbery.
When Johnny told me that his mother had kicked him out because he wouldn't take his pills, I kind of figured there was some issues going on there, whether it was like mental health issues or anger issues. However, he'd been in jail for over 24 hours, so I did not believe that he was still currently high. Okay, so you were staying in Parkview?
I was out there hustling, I ain't gonna lie.
Okay. Did you get into it yourself with anybody out there?
No, I don't even really know anybody out there.
Okay, so here's what we're gonna get at. There was a murder out there Saturday night. The guy that was murdered is named Cameron. Does that name ring a bell to you?
No, not at all.
From everyone that I have talked to, I have been told that you were the one who went in that apartment.
All I know is I did meet him. I didn't know his name.
Johnny's got a lot of, I don't remember, and then when confronted with different pieces of evidence, he'll come up with an excuse on why something happened.
Why would people who were also there when this guy got killed, why would they be telling me that you're the one that did that?
I don't know why.
Listen to me. I'm not trying to trick you into saying anything. Have I asked you any difficult questions here?
No.
I know you're upset, but I
don't know it. And this can take my life away.
Well, you need some water? You want me to get some water? I wanted to leave the room to kind of regroup with the other detectives and figure out where to go from there.
The Pulpo guy email you the reports or anything?
Not yet. Johnny had been arrested with 2 guns. I'll probably just call and ask her what that gun is. I knew that I was looking for a gun with a blue bandana on the grip of it. And if I can tie Johnny Clark to that gun, that's huge for us. Hello.
I think Sapulpa arrested one of my homicide suspects last night, and I was wondering if you could tell me what gun they booked in.
Okay, what's your guy's name?
Johnny Lee Clark.
I just actually checked that into my property room. We arrested a guy and took 2 guns. Let's see. One of them is a starter pistol. One of them is a 9mm Smith & Wesson semi-automatic.
What's the grip look like?
It's got a funky... You want me to take a picture of it and send it to you?
Yes, please.
When she says that the gun's got a funky grip, you start getting this warm, fuzzy feeling inside.
That's my victim's gun.
That directly tied Johnny Clark to Cameron and the murder.
He was at the Regency. He had this stashed inside of the room air conditioner, hidden.
I don't think it was a coincidence that Johnny had that gun. I was very confident that when ballistics came back that it was most likely going to be the murder weapon.
But I feel like I got shot, almost got shot by his gun. He got like a blue bandana on the grip.
And it just really solidifies the information that you were told.
36 hours into the investigation.
You got everything that you need.
Yeah.
You have got enough to charge this man with first-degree murder.
The confession would be would be great. But at the end of the day, I still had the case.
At this point, we want the why. Why did this happen? And Johnny's the only one that can tell us it.
Can I show you a picture of something?
Yes.
What is this?
That's a gun.
Okay. You recognize that gun?
No.
That's the gun that Sepulpa found.
Okay.
Look at me. That's Cameron's gun. How did Cameron's gun end up with you?
Oh no.
When that gun is tested, the one that was found, is it going to have your DNA on it?
I have held this gun before when we was over there. Trying to buy it from him.
He tried to separate himself from the guns, and then when I flat out asked him if his DNA was going to be on the gun, he then came up with a story of, well, yeah, because I tried to buy it from him, earlier that day. And I was like, yeah, I don't believe that story.
I didn't do nothing to the man. I promise them, I promise.
He just kept getting frustrated. I think it's because he could not come up with any more lies.
He's dead. And I think that you seem upset about that. But I will tell you that the facts and the evidence show that you killed Cameron. That's why I'm asking you why. You were high. You went over.
I just want to go back to myself. I want a lawyer.
All right.
Johnny Lee Clark is charged with first-degree murder.
I didn't get any kind of feeling that he was remorseful about what happened. I got the feeling that he was upset because he thought his life was over. I was confident about this case going to court.
We had everything we needed for a strong prosecution's case. Good eyewitnesses, the murder weapon, suspect arrested with a murder weapon. And at the same time, there's always those thoughts, where could this unravel?
When I got the case, my biggest thought was, oh my gosh, this is someone who really meant to kill people that night. We had a completed robbery, and then he comes back and he tries to take care of the witnesses. This case is about Cameron. This case is about Patricia. This case is about Patricia's daughter. This case is about Juan. You can never tell a victim's family that you're 100% confident that you'll be able to convict the defendant, but we're going to do everything we possibly can to ensure that we get justice. Prepping for a trial, I knew the case was really strong. The fact that we found the defendant with the murder weapon, even bigger than that, he had hidden it in an air conditioner. I mean, that's a huge indication of consciousness of guilt. However, the concern I had was I knew this was going to be an identification case. We were going to need to link Johnny Clark to the person that was in the apartment that night.
When I first read the reports for Johnny's case, I wasn't terribly worried about eyewitnesses IDing Johnny. Johnny was represented by several lawyers in our office, in the Tulsa County Public Defender's Office, including myself. The state must prove beyond a reasonable doubt every element of every crime the defendant is charged with.
The person who fired that gun was partially wearing a ski mask, so all you could see were his mouth and his eyes. So victims are left to make an ID through voice or through the small slits that are in the ski mask.
The police had done a lineup, and they had showed the lineup to everyone that was in the apartment that evening: Patricia, Patricia's daughter, and Juan.
All right, so I'm going to show you a series of photos.
There's 6 photographs in here. It's just as important to clear innocent persons from suspicion as to identify guilty parties, okay? Mm-hmm. The person who committed the crime may or may not be in the set of photographs being presented.
Recognize these people? None of these people are private persons.
You don't see any of your cars?
This looks like the person pork chop, but his hair's longer. I seen the backside of him.
Patricia makes a partial ID.
but I could say about 65-75%.
Okay.
Nobody saw his face. His identification came up from a witness from earlier in the day.
I thought that that was going to be the defense's biggest strategy, basically saying, we don't know for sure that this was Johnny Clark.
That could be a real problem. If you can't say that's the guy, you're over and you're done with. If we can't get a person identifying Johnny in the apartment, we're gonna have to link it up with circumstantial evidence.
As the DA's office prepares their case,
I knew that one of my big witnesses was going to be Cameron's friend. He had been walking around with Johnny Clark that day. He was helping him sell marijuana, and the defendant used his phone. And that was one way we were able to link up the actual name Johnny Clark to this person that was in the apartment during the murder.
Johnny didn't have a mask on when he was interacting with Cameron's friend, and so it was a really good idea to have Cameron's friend make a positive ID.
But I was never able to locate Cameron's friend in jury trial preparation.
When someone's kind of involved in crime, the last thing they want to do is tell against another person who commits a crime. He was assisting Johnny selling drugs, so his level of cooperation is going to be a concern.
And 3 months after the preliminary hearing, a major setback.
Before trial, Juan unfortunately died in a tragic accident. I thought it was really sad. And Juan was absolutely an important witness. He's someone who is there when both the robbery and the homicide happened.
Now, we lose his voice in this entire case. You can't use a witness's recorded statement to police during the trial. The defense and the defendant have a constitutional right to confront their witnesses, so that's a challenge.
When you know you're going to have witness issues, you look to the other evidence to make your case other ways.
The strength of the state's case was the murder weapon was found with Johnny. Johnny's statement did not help him either. He placed himself at the murder scene. But Johnny was quite intoxicated when he was arrested, so there was a possible voluntary intoxication defense.
That was going to be an issue in this case. Voluntary intoxication removes the necessary deliberateness for first-degree murder. They would easily be able to say to a jury, my client told you he had taken multiple drugs.
Heroin, methamphetamine, PCP, weed, liquor.
And if we don't have the state of mind that's required, all we're left is manslaughter in the first degree.
Manslaughter means someone is overcome with passion. Johnny went into that apartment with a starter pistol. A starter pistol does not fire a projectile. He could not have killed anybody. I believe Johnny went to threaten somebody into giving up whatever money or whatever drugs they happened to have, but it was more of a crime of unfortunate opportunity that Johnny found a functioning firearm that day.
But the witnesses at the scene indicated that deliberateness.
He comes back and we heard the click, click. He shot it 3 or 4 times.
Johnny completed the robbery. He was able to leave the apartment, and then he came back, and he tries to eliminate witnesses. To me, that is someone who is completely self-interested and is a dangerous human being.
Before the trial is set to begin,
We were scheduled for a hearing, and the defense came to me and asked if I would consider a number.
The closer we got to trial, it became clear to both of us that the facts of this case were insurmountable. The state wanted life in prison for murder. Johnny was very young to spend the rest of his life in prison.
There is a valid back and forth that we have with ourselves. Can we go to a jury and with some level of certainty get a guilty verdict and get life?
You never know what could happen during trial. Nothing is guaranteed.
I would much rather a defendant get a stiff term in prison than gambling at trial and risking him walking out of the courtroom a free man.
The state decides to accept Johnny's plea.
Though we don't exchange life for a life, he is going to have to spend much, if not the rest of his life, behind bars.
Your home is supposed to be the safest place. Johnny invaded that, and he completely disrupted the lives of Cameron's family and even Patricia's daughter, Patricia herself.
The ripple effect of a homicide is immense. Their families are also victims.
It doesn't matter how many years goes by. Nobody will ever fill that void. Nobody can ever make it right.
Cameron used to ride his bikes on these streets, used to run around with all his friends in high school on these streets. Being here makes me feel very close to Cameron. It's a wonderful feeling getting to see the people that he knew and grew up with. They call me Aunt Chris, just like Cameron. I hear it in my head every day. As soon as he would come in the house, that would be what I would hear. Yo, Aunt Chris, what's going on? Just to interact with him was a good vibe. Cameron was a human being. People are going to forget about him because he's not in their everyday life, but that little girl will never forget about her father. Anytime I see her, I make sure I tell her that she looks like her daddy, because I don't want her to forget. I'm grateful that I had the life that I had with Cameron. I believe he's with me every day. I believe he's with his daughter every day. And I think that's why I can't get...
The rain had been falling for 3 straight days when investigators opened the old basement door beneath the abandoned farmhouse outside Black Hollow, Missouri. Nobody expected to find anything. For 37 years, the house had stood empty. The windows were cracked. The wooden floors were covered in dust. The walls carried the stains of time. Locals called it a place where the past refused to disappear. But beneath layers of dirt, beneath forgotten boxes and rotting furniture, investigators discovered something that would reopen one of the strangest mysteries the county had ever seen. A small metal container. Inside it was a faded photograph, a handwritten note, and a name that had haunted Black Hollow since the winter of 1986, Evelyn Carter. For decades, her disappearance had remained one of the town's darkest unanswered questions. A young woman vanished without warning. No body, no confession, no clear suspect, only rumors, broken memories, and a family that refused to talk about what happened on the cold January night when Evelyn Carter walked out her home and never returned. For years, people believed the truth was buried forever. They were wrong. Because the secret that finally cracked the case was not hidden in a police file. It was hidden inside the family that had spent decades protecting it. January 17th, 1986. Black Hollow was covered in snow. The small Missouri town was the kind of place where everybody knew everybody. A place where front doors stayed unlocked. A place where neighbors watched each other's houses during storms. A place where people believed terrible things only happened somewhere else. Until Evelyn disappeared. She was 26 years old. A quiet woman with a reputation for keeping to herself. She worked at the local medical supply store, volunteered at the church downtown, and lived with her husband, Daniel Carter, in a small white farmhouse at the edge of town. To most people, Evelyn's life looked ordinary. But behind closed doors, something was changing. Friends later remembered that Evelyn had become nervous in the weeks before her disappearance. She stopped answering phone calls. She canceled plans. She started carrying a small notebook everywhere she went. A friend named Laura Bennett later told investigators that Evelyn seemed afraid, not terrified, not panicked, just afraid enough to know something was wrong. The last confirmed sighting of Evelyn Carter came on a freezing Friday night. A neighbor saw her standing outside the farmhouse near midnight. She was wearing a dark coat. She was holding something in her hand, and she appeared to be arguing with someone inside the house. the neighbor, an elderly man named Harold Pierce, remembered hearing Ray's voices, but he never saw who was inside. At the time, he thought it was just a private argument, a husband and wife. Nothing more. The next morning, Evelyn's car was still parked outside. Her purse was still inside. Her coat was gone. Her favorite necklace was sitting on the kitchen table, and her notebook was missing. When Daniel Carter reported her missing, he told police that Evelyn had left during the night. He claimed they had an argument. He claimed she said she needed time away. He claimed he believed she would come home. But investigators immediately noticed something strange. Evelyn had left without money, without identification, without her medication, without the things a person would normally take if they planned to disappear. The first search began within hours. Police officers walked through frozen fields surrounding the farmhouse. Volunteers searched abandoned roads. Dogs followed trails that disappeared near the edge of the property. But nothing was found. No footprints. No clothing. No evidence of where Evelyn had gone. The case quickly became a mystery. And in a town as small as Black Hollow, mysteries did not stay quiet for long. Rumors spread. Some believed Evelyn had run away. Others believed she had been harmed. Some pointed toward her husband. Daniel Carter denied everything. He told reporters that he loved his wife. He said he had no reason to hurt her. And without physical evidence, investigators had little they could do. The case slowly began to freeze. Not because police stopped caring, but because every path led nowhere. Every question created more questions. The years passed. 1987 became 1988. 1988 became 1990. The missing person posters faded. The newspaper articles disappeared into archives. The people who remembered Evelyn grew older, and Black Hollow moved on. But one person never stopped looking. Evelyn's younger sister, Rachel. Rachel Carter was 17 when Evelyn vanished. She spent decades believing her sister's disappearance was not random. She believed somebody knew the truth, and she believed that truth was being protected, because there was one detail from that night that never made sense. The family changed their story. At first, Daniel Carter said Evelyn left after an argument. Months later, he said he could not remember exactly what happened. Years later, he refused to discuss the night at all. And then came the strangest part. The Carter family farmhouse was sold in 1998. The new owners lasted less than a year. They left after claiming they discovered old personal belongings hidden inside the basement walls. The items were never publicly identified. The family denied knowing anything about them. The investigation remained closed until a new generation of detectives reopened the file. Decades later, advances in forensic technology changed everything. Old evidence that once seemed useless became valuable. Archived photographs were examined again. Old witness statements were reviewed, and investigators discovered something buried inside the original case files. A missing page. A single report from 1986 that had never been followed up. The report mentioned a family gathering held at the Carter farmhouse 3 days before Evelyn vanished. A gathering that nobody had talked about. A gathering where Evelyn had confronted relatives about a secret she claimed could destroy the family. For 37 years, investigators believed Evelyn disappeared because of something that happened that night. Now they wonder if the answer had been sitting inside the family's own history all along. The discovery of the basement container changed the investigation overnight. The photograph inside showed Evelyn standing beside a person nobody had ever seen in the original investigation. On the back of the photograph were 6 handwritten words. 6 words that forced detectives to question everything they thought they knew. They know what happened to me. And beneath that message was a date. January 17th, 1986. The same night Evelyn Carter vanished. The same night Black Hollow lost one of its own. The cold case that haunted the town for decades was no longer a forgotten mystery. Someone had kept the truth hidden. And now, after nearly 40 years of silence, that secret was beginning to come apart. Fictional true crime story. The following story is entirely fictional. Any resemblance to actual persons, locations, or events is purely coincidental. The photograph changed everything. For years, investigators had treated Evelyn Carter's disappearance as a case built on uncertainty. A missing woman, a troubled marriage, a night filled with unanswered questions. But the image recovered from the basement was different. It was not a rumor. It was not a forgotten memory. It was evidence, a piece of the past that had somehow survived nearly 4 decades of silence. Detective Mark Holloway stared at the photograph for almost 10 minutes without saying a word. The image was faded and damaged from years hidden inside the metal container. The edges were burned slightly, as if someone had tried to destroy it before changing their mind. In the photograph, Evelyn stood outside the Carter farmhouse. She looked younger, relaxed, almost happy. Standing beside her was a man investigators had never heard about, a man whose identity was unknown, a man who appeared to have been deliberately erased from Evelyn's life. The back of the photograph carried a message that reopened the investigation. They know what happened to me. Those words became the center of the case, because detectives now had a question that nobody had asked in 1986. Who was Evelyn Warning? The first step was returning to the people who were still alive, former neighbors, old friends, family members who had avoided interviews for decades. And when detectives started asking questions again, they discovered something disturbing. Many people remembered more than they had admitted. The Carter family had always insisted Evelyn's disappearance was a tragedy without answers. But behind closed doors, they had been carrying a secret that began years before Evelyn vanished. The first person investigators questioned was Daniel Carter, Evelyn's husband. Now in his late 70s, Daniel lived alone in a quiet neighborhood several hours away from Black Hollow. When detectives arrived at his home, he initially refused to speak. He told them the case was over. He said there was nothing left to investigate. But when investigators showed him the photograph, his reaction changed instantly. For the first time in decades, Daniel Carter looked afraid. Not confused. Not surprised. Afraid. Detectives noticed his hands shaking. They noticed he avoided looking directly at the image. And then he said something that would send the investigation in a completely different direction. I thought that was gone forever. That sentence raised more questions than answers. Gone forever. Not lost. Not forgotten. Gone. Detectives asked Daniel who the man in the photograph was. He refused to answer. They asked why Evelyn would write a message saying people knew what happened to her. Again, silence. For almost 30 seconds, Daniel said nothing. Then he finally whispered, "You don't understand what that family was hiding." The word family changed the entire investigation, because until that moment, police had focused almost entirely on Evelyn's marriage. But Daniel's statement suggested something much larger, something involving the people closest to her, the Carter family. The same family that had spent decades refusing to discuss the night Evelyn disappeared. Investigators began rebuilding Evelyn's final weeks. They found old interviews, old letters, old photographs, and slowly, a different picture emerged. Evelyn had not been preparing to leave her life behind. She had been preparing to expose something. 3 weeks before she disappeared, Evelyn visited a lawyer in a neighboring town. The meeting lasted 47 minutes. The lawyer's record showed that Evelyn asked questions about inheritance, family property, and legal protection. At the time, nobody understood why. But decades later, detectives realized Evelyn had been investigating her own family. The question was why. What had she discovered? The answer appeared in an old journal found among Evelyn's personal belongings. A journal that had been overlooked because investigators originally believed it contained only personal thoughts. But forensic experts discovered several pages had been removed. Only fragments remained. Short sentences, incomplete notes, names, dates, and one repeated phrase, grandfather's house. Evelyn had written about the Carter family farmhouse, the same farmhouse where she disappeared, the same property where investigators discovered a hidden container decades later. The more detectives examined the history of the property, the stranger the case became. The farmhouse had belonged to Evelyn's grandfather, Thomas Carter, a respected man in Black Hollow, a businessman, a community leader, a man whose reputation had never been questioned. But records revealed something hidden. In 1972, Thomas Carter secretly transferred ownership of part of property to another person, a name that had been removed from family records, a name that appeared nowhere in public documents, a name detectives had never heard before: Michael Valle, the man from the photograph, the person Evelyn had been standing beside years before her disappearance. Investigators searched every database available. Michael Valle was not a criminal. He had no arrest record, no police history, no obvious connection to Evelyn. But there was one problem. Michael Valle had disappeared in 1986, just months after Evelyn vanished. His disappearance had never been investigated because nobody knew he existed. The discovery shocked detectives. 2 people, 2 disappearances, 1 family, 1 property, and decades of silence. Suddenly, Evelyn Carter was no longer just a missing person. She was part of a much larger mystery. Detectives returned to Black Hollow. They searched the old farmhouse again, this time with a different understanding. They were not looking for a missing woman. They were looking for a hidden history. Behind a section of basement wall, investigators discovered another object, a small wooden box. Inside were letters, dozens of them. Most were damaged, but several remained readable. The letters were between Evelyn and Michael Valle, and what they revealed stunned investigators. Michael was not a stranger. He was connected to the Carter family, but not in the way anyone expected. He was Thomas Carter's son from a relationship that had been kept secret for more than 30 years. Evelyn had discovered that her respected grandfather had hidden an entire branch of the family, a secret child, a hidden inheritance, a forgotten identity. But that was not the secret that terrified her. The final readable letter contained only a few sentences, written in Evelyn's handwriting. Michael found the records. They know he talked. They will do anything to keep this buried. The detectives reading those words understood something immediately. Evelyn had not disappeared because she wanted to leave. She disappeared because she knew something powerful enough to make people protect her for decades. And now investigators had a new timeline, a new suspect group, and a question that had remained unanswered since 1986. What happened inside the Carter farmhouse on the night Evelyn Carter vanished? Because the truth was no longer buried in the past. It was waiting. And someone had spent 37 years making sure nobody found it. Fictional true crime story. The following story is entirely fictional. Any resemblance to actual persons, locations, or events is purely coincidental. The discovery of the letters transformed the Carter investigation from forgotten disappearance into a family mystery that had been carefully protected for decades. For the first time since 1986, detectives had a reason to believe Evelyn Carter's disappearance was not an accident. She had been searching for something. She had found something. And shortly before she vanished, she had realized someone wanted that information buried forever. The old farmhouse outside Black Hollow became the center of the investigation once again, a place where memories had faded, a place where witnesses had grown old, a place where the truth had remained locked behind walls, hidden beneath layers of dust and silence. Detective Mark Holloway spent weeks studying every document connected to the Carter family: birth certificates, property records, bank statements, old newspaper articles. Every piece of paper told a small part of the story, but together they revealed something much darker. The Carter family had built its reputation on a carefully maintained image: respectable, successful, untouchable. But behind that image was a history filled with secrets. Thomas Carter, Evelyn's grandfather, had spent decades controlling the family's wealth. He owned several properties around Black Hollow. He controlled business deals. He had influence over local organizations. People respected him. People trusted him. But investigators discovered that Thomas Carter had spent years hiding a second family. Michael Vale was not simply an unknown relative. He was a result of a relationship Thomas Carter had concealed from everyone. When Evelyn discovered the truth, she began digging deeper. She found financial records that suggested Michael had been intentionally removed from the family inheritance. She found documents showing payments made to keep his existence quiet. And she found evidence that someone inside the family knew about the secret, someone who had helped maintain the lie. The question was no longer why Evelyn disappeared. The question was who had the most to lose if she revealed the truth. Investigators returned to the people closest to Evelyn. One name appeared repeatedly: Caroline Carter, Evelyn's aunt, the woman who had organized family gatherings at the farmhouse, the woman who had always spoken publicly about how much she loved Evelyn, and the woman who had refused every interview request for almost 40 years. Detectives visited Caroline's home early one morning. She was 81 years old. Her memory appeared sharp. Her answers appeared carefully prepared. At first, she denied knowing anything about Michael Vale. She claimed she had never heard the name. But when detectives placed the old photograph on the table, everything changed. Caroline stared at it. Her expression became unreadable. Then she quietly said, "That picture should never have survived." The statement was enough. Detectives knew they had found someone connected to the secret. They asked Caroline what happened to Evelyn. She looked away. For several minutes, she said nothing. Then she told investigators something unexpected. She said Evelyn had discovered the truth years before anyone realized. She said Evelyn had confronted the family. She said Evelyn wanted to expose everything. But Caroline insisted she did not know what happened after that. "I warned her," Caroline said. "I told her to stop asking questions." Detectives immediately asked why. Why would a family member warn Evelyn to stop investigating her own relatives? Caroline's answer revealed the fear that had surrounded the Carter family for decades. Because some secrets don't stay buried by accident. That sentence became one of the most important statements in the entire case, because it suggested the family was not simply hiding embarrassment. They were hiding something dangerous. Investigators began examining the night Evelyn disappeared from a new perspective. They reconstructed the timeline minute by minute. At 7:30 p.m., Evelyn attended dinner at the Carter farmhouse. At 9:15 p.m., neighbors reported hearing an argument. At 10:40 p.m., Michael Vale was seen driving toward the property. At midnight, Evelyn was seen outside the house. And after that, nothing. No confirmed sightings, no phone calls, no evidence, just silence. But detectives discovered one detail that had been missed in the original investigation: a vehicle repair receipt, a receipt from a small mechanic shop outside town. The date? January 18, 1986, the day after Evelyn disappeared. The vehicle? A dark blue pickup truck registered to Caroline Carter. The repair? A damaged passenger side door. When investigators found the receipt, they immediately questioned Caroline. She claimed she had hit a tree during a snowstorm, but weather records showed something strange. There had been no major storm that night, no icy roads, no dangerous driving conditions. The explanation no longer made sense. Forensic teams examined the old truck after locating it in a storage facility. Decades of rust covered the vehicle. The original paint was damaged. Most evidence was gone. But modern testing revealed something hidden beneath the surface. A tiny fragment. A trace. Something that had survived nearly 40 years. A piece of fabric caught inside the damaged door frame. The material matched the coat Evelyn was wearing the night she disappeared. The discovery shocked investigators, but it created an even bigger question. How did Evelyn's coat end up inside Caroline Carter's truck? The answer remained hidden until detectives discovered another document, a letter written by Michael Vale, a letter never delivered, a letter addressed to Evelyn. Inside, Michael described what he had learned about the Carter family. He wrote about the hidden inheritance. He wrote about the years of deception. And he wrote about a meeting he planned to have on January 17, 1986, the night Evelyn vanished. The final line of the letter was the most disturbing. Michael wrote, "If anything happens to me or Evelyn, look at the people who benefited from the silence." Investigators froze, because after nearly 40 years, they finally understood the pattern. Evelyn and Michael had both discovered the same secret. Both disappeared. And both had connections to the same family. The Carter family had spent decades protecting a reputation, but reputations could not hide evidence forever. The walls of the old farmhouse had already begun to speak. The forgotten photograph, the hidden letters, the damaged truck, the missing inheritance records. Every clue pointed toward one terrifying possibility. Evelyn Carter did not vanish into the unknown. She vanished because someone close to her made sure she would never reveal what she knew. And now detectives were closer than ever to discovering what happened on that freezing night in 1986. But before they could find the truth, they had to uncover the final secret, the one the Carter family had protected above everything else. The following story is entirely fictional. Any resemblance to actual persons, locations, or events is purely coincidental. The deeper investigators looked into the Carter family, the clearer one terrifying truth became. The disappearance of Evelyn Carter was never a single night of chaos. It was a final moment of a secret that had been growing for decades. A secret protected by fear. A secret protected by money. A secret protected by people who believed time would erase every trace of what they had done. But time had done the opposite. Time had preserved the evidence. The old farmhouse, the forgotten letters, the hidden photograph, the damaged truck. All of it had survived long enough to bring the past back to life. And now detectives needed to answer the question that had remained unanswered since that cold January night. Where did Evelyn Carter go? For weeks, investigators studied the property records connected to the Carter family. They discovered something hidden inside Thomas Carter's old financial documents. A series of payments made every month between 1974 and 1986. The money was transferred through different accounts, different banks, different names. But every payment eventually led back to one location, the farmhouse. Detectives believed those payments were connected to Michael Vale, but the records revealed something stranger. The payment stopped exactly 1 month before Evelyn disappeared. Someone had cut off the money. Someone had decided the secret could no longer continue. The investigators returned to Black Hollow and began speaking with people who had lived there in 1986. Most remembered Evelyn as quiet, kind, someone who avoided conflict. But several people remembered something else. They remembered that Evelyn had changed shortly before she vanished. She was no longer afraid of the Carter family. She was angry. A former co-worker named Lisa Warren told detectives that Evelyn had shown her a folder of documents weeks before her disappearance. Lisa said Evelyn looked exhausted. She said Evelyn kept repeating the same sentence. They lied to everyone. At the time, Lisa thought Evelyn was talking about a personal argument. She never imagined she was talking about a family secret that had lasted generations. According to Lisa, Evelyn wanted to meet someone who could confirm what she had discovered. That person was Michael Vale, the man who had been erased from the Carter family history, the man whose existence had been hidden, the man who disappeared shortly after Evelyn. Investigators now believe Michael had not been a stranger in Evelyn's life. He had been her source. Together, they had uncovered something that threatened the entire Carter legacy. But the more detectives searched, the more they realized Michael's disappearance had also been ignored. A missing person report had been filed in another county, but it was incomplete. There was almost no investigation, no media coverage, no search effort. It looked as if someone wanted Michael to disappear quietly, the same way Evelyn had. That discovery changed the entire direction of the case. Detectives were no longer investigating one disappearance. They were investigating two. And both victims were connected to the same family, the Carter family. Meanwhile, Caroline Carter continued to insist she knew nothing about Evelyn's disappearance. But investigators noticed something unusual. Every time they mentioned the night of January 17, 1986, Caroline corrected small details. She remembered things she claimed she had forgotten. She remembered what Evelyn was wearing. She remembered what time people arrived. She remembered conversations nobody had asked about. Detectives recognized a pattern. A person who truly forgot usually struggled with details. A person protecting a secret often remembered too much. During the second interview, investigators confronted Caroline with the evidence from the truck, the fabric fragment, the repair record, the hidden photograph. For the first time, her story began to break. She admitted she had lied, but she insisted she had not killed Evelyn. Instead, she revealed something investigators never expected. She said there was another person at the farmhouse that night, someone who had never been questioned, someone who had controlled the Carter family for decades, someone whose name had been missing from every conversation: Richard Carter, Evelyn's uncle, the oldest surviving son of Thomas Carter, the man who inherited control of the family properties after Thomas died. According to Caroline, Richard was the person who protected the family image. He handled the money. He handled the business. He handled the secrets. And when Evelyn discovered Michael Vale's identity, Richard was the person she confronted. Caroline told detectives that Evelyn believed Richard knew about Michael all along. She believed Richard had helped erase him from the family, and she believed Richard had something to do with the missing inheritance. Investigators searched for Richard Carter, but there was a problem. Richard had died years earlier. He passed away in 2004, taking whatever secrets he carried with him, or at least that was what everyone believed. But detectives discovered one final piece of evidence: a recorded message, a voicemail stored on an old backup system from a law office that had represented the Carter family. The message was dated January 16, 1986, one day before Evelyn disappeared. The caller was Richard Carter. His voice was calm, controlled, but his words were disturbing. He said, "She found the papers. We need to handle this before morning." That sentence became the turning point, because it proved Richard knew Evelyn had discovered the documents, and it proved someone was planning a response before she vanished. Investigators now had a timeline. Evelyn discovered the truth. She contacted Michael. She confronted the family, and then both of them disappeared. But the biggest mystery remained. What happened inside the farmhouse that night? The answer came from an unexpected place, a hidden section of the basement, the same place where the photograph had been found. Using modern scanning equipment, investigators discovered an old section of flooring that had been replaced shortly after Evelyn disappeared. The original records showed no reason for the renovation. No flood, no damage, no repairs needed. Someone had changed the floor intentionally. When investigators removed the newer boards, they found something beneath them. Not a body, not a weapon. Something much more important. A small envelope sealed inside plastic. Inside were pages torn from Evelyn's missing notebook. The handwriting was unmistakable. The final pages of Evelyn Carter's journal. The last words she ever wrote. And what she had written revealed the final moments before she disappeared. She had arranged a meeting. She had planned to confront the family. She believed someone was going to confess. But at the bottom of the final page, Evelyn had written one sentence. A sentence that explained why she was afraid. Someone in this house knows exactly what happened to Michael. The investigation that had been frozen for decades was finally moving. The truth was no longer hidden behind rumors. The Carter family secret was beginning to collapse. But detectives still needed one final answer. If Evelyn had written those words inside the farmhouse, who was the last person who saw her alive? The following story is entirely fictional. Any resemblance to actual persons, locations, or events is purely coincidental. The final page of Evelyn Carter's notebook changed the investigation forever. For 37 years, police had searched for a missing woman. Now they were searching for the truth behind a family that had spent decades burying its own history. The words written on that torn page were not a goodbye. They were a warning. Someone in this house knows exactly what happened to Michael. Detective Mark Holloway read the sentence again and again, because Evelyn was not writing like someone planning to disappear. She was writing like someone who knew she was in danger. The notebook revealed that Evelyn had spent months gathering information. She had copied names, recorded conversations, saved documents. Every detail pointed toward one conclusion. She believed Michael Vale had not simply left Black Hollow. She believed he had been forced out, and she believed the Carter family had been involved. But the most disturbing discovery was hidden in the final entries. Evelyn had written about a meeting scheduled for the night she vanished. A meeting with 3 people, 3 members of the Carter family. She believed they would finally explain the truth. She believed the confrontation would end years of lies. She was wrong. The meeting became the last known moment of Evelyn Carter's life. Investigators reconstructed that night again. January 17, 1986. The temperature dropped below freezing. Snow covered the roads around Black Hollow. The Carter farmhouse stood alone at the edge of the woods. At 6:45 p.m., Evelyn arrived. At 7:10 p.m., Caroline Carter arrived. At 7:30 p.m., Richard Carter was seen entering the property. And at 8:05 p.m., according to a newly discovered witness statement, another vehicle arrived. A dark blue pickup truck, registered to Michael Vale. For decades, investigators believed Michael disappeared before Evelyn. But the new evidence suggested something different. Michael was there that night, at the farmhouse, with Evelyn, and with the people who had the most reason to silence them. The witness who reported seeing the truck was a former delivery driver named Frank Miller. In 1986, Frank had been making late deliveries to businesses outside town. He remembered passing the Carter farmhouse because of the unusual number of vehicles parked outside. At the time, it seemed strange, but not suspicious. He never imagined that decades later, that memory would become one of the most important pieces of evidence in the case. Frank told detectives something else. He saw someone standing beside the truck. A man. Tall. Wearing a dark jacket. He could not identify the person, but he remembered one detail. The person appeared to be arguing with someone near the vehicle. That person was likely Michael Vale, the same man who disappeared afterward. Investigators now believe the events of that night happened differently than anyone had originally thought. Evelyn did not leave. Michael did not leave. They were both at the farmhouse. And something happened inside those walls. Something that caused 2 people to vanish from the same place. The next breakthrough came from the letters found hidden in the basement. Forensic experts examined the paper, the ink, the handwriting, the order of the pages. They discovered that the letters were not written over a long period of time. Most had been written within the final month before the disappearance. Michael had been documenting everything. He knew he was taking a risk. One letter contained a sentence that shocked investigators. Richard knows the truth about my father, but he is more afraid of what Evelyn found. That sentence connected everything. Richard Carter was not protecting an old family embarrassment. He was protecting something much larger, something involving Thomas Carter's hidden son, something involving money, something involving power. Investigators began examining the family inheritance. They found that after Thomas Carter died, millions of dollars in assets were transferred, but one name was missing, Michael Vale, the legal heir who should have had a claim. Instead, the inheritance was controlled by Richard Carter, the same man who had been present the night Evelyn disappeared, the same man whose voicemail mentioned handling the situation before morning, the same man who never explained why. But Richard Carter was dead, and without his testimony, detectives needed another way to prove what happened. That evidence came from Caroline. After weeks of interviews, she finally agreed to tell investigators the full story, not because she wanted to, because she knew the truth had already started coming out. Caroline admitted that the family meeting on January 17th was not about a disagreement. It was about Evelyn's discoveries. Evelyn had brought documents proving Michael's identity. She had brought records showing years of hidden payments. And she had threatened to expose everything. Caroline said Richard became furious. She said he believed Evelyn would destroy the family name. But Caroline still insisted she left before anything happened. She claimed she drove away around midnight. She claimed Evelyn was alive when she left. Investigators asked the question they had been waiting years to ask. Who stayed behind? Caroline did not answer immediately. The silence lasted nearly a minute. Then she finally spoke. Richard. That single name reopened every unanswered question. Because if Richard stayed behind with Evelyn and Michael, then he was the last person known to have control of the situation. But detectives still needed physical evidence. A confession. Something that connected Richard directly to the disappearance. And they found it in a place nobody expected. An old family storage unit. After Richard Carter's death, his belongings were divided among relatives. Most items were considered worthless. Old furniture, documents, boxes of personal belongings. But inside one box, detectives discovered something hidden beneath layers of newspapers. A cassette tape, recorded in 1986. The label had only one word, Evelyn. The tape was damaged. The audio quality was poor, but after restoration, investigators heard voices. A conversation recorded inside the farmhouse on the night Evelyn disappeared. The voices were difficult to identify, but one voice was unmistakable, Richard Carter. And what he said on that tape revealed that Evelyn's disappearance was never an accident. It was a decision made by people who believed they could control the truth forever. The recording lasted less than 4 minutes. But those 4 minutes would finally reveal what happened inside the Carter farmhouse. And after 37 years of silence, Black Hollow was about to learn the secret that destroyed an entire family. The following story is entirely fictional. Any resemblance to actual persons, locations, or events is purely coincidental. The cassette tape sat inside the evidence room for 3 days before investigators were able to fully restore the audio. 3 days of waiting. 3 days of listening to fragments. 3 days of hearing nothing but static, broken signals, and distorted voices from a night that had remained hidden for nearly 4 decades. But when the final restoration was complete, the silence surrounding Evelyn Carter's disappearance finally began to break. The recording started with the sound of movement, a door closing, footsteps across a wooden floor, a chair scraping against the ground, then a woman's voice. Evelyn. Her voice was calm. But underneath it was something else. Determination. She was not frightened. She was confronting someone. The next voice belonged to Richard Carter. Older. Cold. Controlled. Investigators immediately recognized the same tone described by family members who had known him for years. A man who believed he could solve every problem with influence, money, pressure. The conversation began quietly, but within minutes, it became clear why Evelyn had been afraid. She had discovered the truth about Michael Vale. She had discovered the hidden inheritance. She had discovered years of financial records proving the Carter family had erased someone from their own bloodline. And Richard knew she had evidence. "You don't understand what you're doing," Richard said on the recording. Evelyn answered, "No, I understand exactly what I'm doing." That sentence became one of the most important moments in the entire investigation, because it proved Evelyn was not confused. She was not running away. She knew the danger, and she chose to face it. The recording continued. Richard tried to convince Evelyn that exposing the secret would destroy everyone. He talked about the family name, the reputation, the businesses, the people who depended on them. But Evelyn refused to listen. She told him the truth was already destroyed. The family had destroyed it themselves. Then Michael spoke. His voice was quieter. He sounded exhausted. He told Richard he only wanted what belonged to him. He did not want revenge. He did not want attention. He wanted the years that had been taken from him. The conversation suddenly changed. Richard stopped trying to negotiate. His voice became colder. He said, "You have no idea what you're risking." For decades, investigators had wondered what happened after that moment. The tape provided only part of the answer. The final seconds contained sounds. A struggle. A loud impact. Someone shouting. Then silence. The recording ended. but the silence after the tape stopped was louder than anything investigators had heard, because now they knew. Evelyn Carter had been alive inside the farmhouse that night. Michael Vale had been alive inside the farmhouse that night. And something happened after that conversation, something that had been hidden for 37 years. The investigation expanded immediately. The old farmhouse was searched again. This time, investigators were looking for evidence connected to the recording, not just physical evidence, but a timeline, a sequence of events, a story. And slowly, the final hours of Evelyn Carter's life began to emerge. The first discovery came from the basement. The area beneath the repaired floor was examined again. Advanced scanning technology revealed disturbances beneath the soil, places where the ground had been moved. Investigators carefully excavated the area. After decades, they found what everyone feared: human remains. 2 sets. The discovery shocked Black Hollow, the missing woman, the forgotten man. Together again, after nearly 40 years. The remains were identified through modern forensic testing. One belonged to Evelyn Carter. The other belonged to Michael Vale. The mystery that had haunted the town for generations finally had an answer, but the investigation was not over. Finding the victims was only the beginning. Now detectives needed to prove what happened. They needed to understand how 2 people disappeared inside a family home without anyone speaking. The evidence revealed a disturbing timeline. After the confrontation inside the farmhouse, Richard Carter attempted to control the situation. He moved the victims to the basement. He used the family's influence to prevent questions. He convinced relatives to remain silent. And over the following days, the Carter family created a story built on omission. They did not need everyone to lie. They only needed everyone to say nothing. That was the secret behind the case. Not one person protecting a crime. An entire family protecting a reputation. Investigators discovered that several relatives had known pieces of the truth. Caroline knew. Others suspected. Some helped hide information. Some simply looked away. For decades, that silence protected the Carter name. But investigators still faced one problem. Richard Carter was dead. The person responsible could never stand trial. However, the goal of the investigation was never only about punishment. It was about giving Evelyn and Michael the truth they had been denied, and it was about showing the world what happened. The case became one of the most shocking cold case breakthroughs in Missouri history. A disappearance that began with a missing woman, a mystery that became a family scandal, a secret that survived longer than anyone expected. But the investigation uncovered one final piece of evidence. A letter written by Richard Carter shortly before his death. The letter was never sent. It was discovered among his private belongings. For years, nobody knew it existed. Inside, Richard described the night everything changed. He admitted he had made mistakes. He admitted he had been afraid, but he never directly confessed. Instead, he wrote something that investigators believed explained everything. I spent my life protecting a family that was already broken. Those words revealed the tragedy behind the mystery. The Carter family had spent decades protecting a name, but that name was built on fear, on lies, on silence. The people involved believed the truth would disappear with time. They believed memories would fade. They believed the evidence would vanish. They were wrong. Because decades later, a forgotten photograph, a hidden notebook, a damaged cassette tape, and the determination of investigators brought everything back. For the people of Black Hollow, the discovery changed the town forever. The farmhouse was no longer just an abandoned building. It became the place where a decades-old secret finally collapsed. And for Evelyn Carter's family, the answer they had waited for came with both relief and pain. They finally knew what happened, but they also had to face the reality that the people closest to Evelyn had been the ones who kept her story hidden. The cold case was solved, but the scars left behind would never disappear. Because some mysteries are not frightening because they remain unanswered. They are frightening because the answer was there all along, waiting beneath the silence. The following story is entirely fictional. Any resemblance to actual persons, locations, or events is purely coincidental. The discovery of Evelyn Carter and Michael Vale beneath the old farmhouse brought an end to one mystery, but it opened another. For the people of Black Hollow, the question was no longer what happened to them. The question was how so many people could have known something was wrong and still remained silent for nearly 40 years. The investigation shifted from searching for the missing to understanding the silence. Detectives returned to every interview from 1986, every statement, every conversation, every forgotten detail. They began comparing what people said back then with what they said decades later, and the differences were impossible to ignore. The original investigation had focused heavily on Daniel Carter, Evelyn's husband, the person everyone naturally suspected. But the new evidence revealed something investigators in 1986 could never have known. Daniel was not the person controlling the secret. He was another person trapped inside it. During a final interview before his death, Daniel had admitted something he had carried for decades. He knew Evelyn had discovered something dangerous. He knew she had been meeting with Michael, but he did not know how far the Carter family would go to protect their reputation. Daniel told investigators that on the night Evelyn disappeared, he received a phone call, a call from Richard Carter. Richard told him there had been a family argument. He told Daniel to stay away from the farmhouse. He told him everything would be handled. At the time, Daniel believed it was just another attempt by the Carter family to control the situation. He never imagined Evelyn would never come home. But detectives discovered another disturbing detail. Daniel did not report Richard's involvement, not in 1986, not in 1990, not even when the case was reopened. When investigators asked why, his answer revealed the fear surrounding the Carter family. He said, "People in Black Hollow knew not to challenge the Carters." That sentence explained the environment that allowed the secret to survive. The Carter family was not powerful because people admired them. They were powerful because people were afraid of losing everything by speaking. Businesses depended on them. Families worked for them. Neighbors owed them favors. And over the years, silence became part of the town's identity. But the investigation was not finished. Detectives still needed to understand what happened to Michael Vale, because unlike Evelyn, Michael had no family in Black Hollow, no one searching for him, no one demanding answers. For decades, he was not a missing person. He was a forgotten name. Investigators examined Michael's background. They discovered that before coming to Missouri, he had spent years searching for information about his father. He knew something about his identity was wrong. He knew records were missing. He knew people were hiding the truth. When he finally discovered the Carter connection, he contacted Evelyn, because Evelyn was the only person inside the family who was willing to listen. The two began working together. They collected documents. They copied records. They searched through old property files. And eventually, they found the evidence that could expose the Carter family. A hidden agreement, signed decades earlier. A document proving Michael's existence. A document proving Thomas Carter had deliberately hidden his own son. And a document proving Richard Carter knew everything. That was the secret Evelyn was preparing to reveal. Not just an old family scandal. A decades-long deception that had affected money, property, and inheritance. But investigators discovered something even more disturbing. The document was not the only thing Evelyn found. She also discovered evidence that someone had been paying people to keep quiet. Former employees, family friends, neighbors, people who had witnessed strange events but never spoke. The payments were small, but they continued for years. A reminder, a warning, a way to make sure the past stayed buried. One of those people was Harold Pierce, the elderly neighbor who had reported hearing the argument on the night Evelyn disappeared. For decades, Harold claimed he never saw anything important, but when detectives revisited him, they discovered he had kept something, a personal recording, a conversation he secretly recorded in 1986. Harold explained that after Evelyn vanished, he became suspicious. He remembered the argument. He remembered seeing multiple vehicles. And he remembered seeing Richard Carter leaving the farmhouse late that night. The recording was damaged, but one sentence could still be heard clearly. Richard's voice saying, "Nobody talks about what happened here." That statement became the final confirmation investigators needed. The Carter family's secret had not been protected by accident. It had been protected intentionally. The people involved had made a choice. They chose silence. They chose reputation. They chose protecting the powerful instead of helping the victims. The story of Evelyn Carter and Michael Vale spread beyond Black Hollow. News organizations called it one of the most unusual cold case discoveries in the region. A mystery solved not because of a single breakthrough, but because decades of hidden evidence finally came together. A photograph, a letter, a recording, a damaged vehicle, a forgotten witness. Each piece alone seemed meaningless. Together, they created a truth. For Evelyn's sister Rachel, the discovery brought emotion she struggled to describe. For 37 years, she had lived without answers. Every birthday, every holiday, every family gathering, there was always one empty space, one unanswered question. Now she finally knew. But knowing the truth did not erase the pain. It only changed it. Rachel visited the old farmhouse after the investigation ended. She stood outside the building where her sister had spent her final moments. She looked at the windows, the walls, the ground where Evelyn's story had been hidden, and she placed a photograph recovered from the basement on the front steps. The same photograph that reopened the case. The same photograph that finally brought Evelyn home. The Carter farmhouse was later demolished. The property was sold. The name Carter slowly disappeared from Black Hollow. But the story remained, because the most shocking part of the case was never only the disappearance. It was the realization that the truth had never been far away. It had been surrounded by people who knew, people who remembered, people who chose silence. And after 37 years, the town finally faced a question it had avoided since 1986. How many lives could have been saved if someone had spoken sooner? The following story is entirely fictional. Any resemblance to actual persons, locations, or events is purely coincidental. The question haunted Black Hollow long after the investigation ended. How many lives could have been changed if someone had spoken sooner? Because the tragedy of Evelyn Carter and Michael Vale was not only about what happened inside the farmhouse. It was about everything that happened afterward. The years of silence, the unanswered questions, the families who carried pain without knowing why. The people who lived beside the truth and convinced themselves they had seen nothing. When the case was officially reopened, investigators expected resistance. They expected missing records. They expected damaged memories. They expected people to deny everything. And they were right. But what surprised them was how many people were not protecting the Carter family anymore. They were protecting themselves. For decades, many residents of Black Hollow had carried pieces of the story. A strange conversation, a suspicious vehicle, a warning from someone powerful, a rumor that never disappeared. But fear had turned those memories into secrets, and secrets became heavier the longer they were carried. One of the most important witnesses was a woman named Margaret Ellis. In 1986, Margaret worked at the county records office. She was responsible for filing property documents. At the time, she remembered seeing something unusual, a request from the Carter family, a request to remove certain documents from public access. She remembered thinking it was strange. Property records were not supposed to disappear. But when she questioned her supervisor, she was told not to ask questions. The Carter family had connections. People listened to them. And Margaret learned quickly that some questions were considered dangerous. For 37 years, she kept quiet, but when detectives showed her the recovered documents, she finally decided to speak. She told investigators that Evelyn had visited the records office 2 weeks before she disappeared. Evelyn had been searching for information about Thomas Carter. She had asked about a property transfer, a transfer that involved Michael Vale. Margaret remembered Evelyn's reaction when she found the records. She looked like she had discovered something she couldn't ignore. Margaret said. She wasn't surprised. She was angry. That detail changed the way investigators viewed Evelyn. She was not simply chasing a family secret. She was trying to correct an injustice. Michael Vale had spent his life believing he had been erased. Evelyn wanted to prove that he had not been forgotten. But that decision placed both of them in danger. As investigators continued digging, they uncovered another hidden connection. The Carter family had not only controlled property, they had controlled information. Several newspaper articles from 1986 had been removed from local archives. Stories about Evelyn's disappearance that never reached publication. One reporter who worked for the Black Hollow Gazette admitted that he had written a major article about the case. The article questioned Richard Carter's involvement, but it was never printed. The editor killed the story. Years later, the reporter kept a copy that investigators eventually found. The article contained details that matched the new evidence. It mentioned the family gathering, the hidden inheritance, the argument at the farmhouse, and one sentence that shocked detectives. Sources close to the Carter family believe Evelyn Carter knew too much. Too much. Those words appeared everywhere. In letters, in witness statements, in private conversations. Everyone seemed to know Evelyn had discovered something, but nobody wanted to say what. The investigation eventually revealed the full history of Thomas Carter's secret. Michael Vale was born in 1954. His mother, Helen Vale, had worked for the Carter family. She had a relationship with Thomas Carter before he abandoned both her and their child. For years, Thomas secretly supported Michael financially, but he refused to publicly acknowledge him. When Thomas died, Richard erased every connection. He destroyed documents, changed records, and convinced relatives that silence was necessary. But Michael eventually discovered the truth, and when he came to Black Hollow looking for answers, Evelyn became the person who helped him. The two were not trying to destroy the Carter family. They were trying to force it to admit the truth. That was what Richard feared. Not the money, not the documents, the exposure. Because once the truth came out, the Carter family's reputation would collapse. And for Richard Carter, reputation was everything. The final investigation report described the case as a multi-decade concealment, a disappearance covered not by one person, but by a network of fear and loyalty. Several family members admitted they suspected something had happened. Some admitted they knew Richard had lied. But nobody wanted to be the first person to break the silence. That was the tragedy of Black Hollow. Everyone waited for someone else to speak. And while they waited, Evelyn and Michael remained missing. The recovered evidence eventually allowed investigators to reconstruct the final moments. On the night of January 17, 1986, Evelyn and Michael confronted Richard Carter inside the farmhouse. They presented evidence of the hidden family history. Richard attempted to convince them to remain silent. When they refused, the confrontation turned violent. Afterward, Richard used the basement area to hide what had happened. The family members who arrived later were told only enough to understand one thing. The Carter name had to survive, and they accepted that. For years, for decades, until the walls finally gave up their secrets. The case became a warning across Missouri, a reminder that time does not always erase the truth. Sometimes it preserves it, waiting for the right moment, waiting for someone willing to look again. The old evidence that investigators ignored in 1986 became the evidence that solved the case decades later. The photograph nobody understood, the letters nobody found, the recording nobody heard. All of it remained hidden until someone decided the past deserved another look. And for Rachel Carter, the discovery brought a painful kind of closure. She no longer had to wonder if Evelyn was alive somewhere. She no longer had to imagine endless possibilities. The worst answer was finally the answer, but at least there was an answer. Years after the case was solved, Rachel returned to Black Hollow one final time. She visited the place where Evelyn had lived. She walked the streets her sister once walked. She visited the small church where Evelyn volunteered, and she placed a memorial stone near the edge of town. The inscription was simple. No accusations. No anger. Just a name. Evelyn Carter. A reminder that she existed, that she mattered, that even after decades of silence, someone finally told her story. But for the people of Black Hollow, the mystery never completely disappeared, because the question remained, not who hid the truth. That was known. The real question was how many people saw the signs and chose not to act. Because sometimes the darkest part of a cold case is not the mystery, it is the silence that surrounds it. And in Black Hollow, that silence lasted for 37 years. The following story is entirely fictional. Any resemblance to actual persons, locations, or events is purely coincidental. 37 years of silence had finally ended, but solving the case did not erase the damage left behind, because the Carter family's secret had not only taken 2 lives, it had changed an entire town. Black Hollow had spent decades living beside a mystery people whispered about in grocery stores, a mystery discussed quietly behind closed doors, a mystery that became part of the town's identity. Everyone knew the name Evelyn Carter. Everyone remembered the missing posters. Everyone remembered the unanswered questions, but very few people understood how close the truth had always been. After the case was solved, investigators continued reviewing old evidence, not because they doubted what happened, but because they wanted to understand how the disappearance had remained unsolved for so long. The answer was complicated. There was no single mistake, no single person who prevented justice. Instead, the case failed because every opportunity to discover the truth disappeared one decision at a time. A witness stayed quiet. A document was ignored. A question was never asked. A rumor was dismissed. And slowly, the truth became buried under years of silence. One of the final discoveries came from an old storage room belonging to the Carter family. Inside were boxes filled with personal belongings, family photographs, business records, old letters, and hundreds of pages documenting the Carter family's history. Among those pages was a handwritten diary belonging to Thomas Carter, the man whose secret started everything. The diary revealed a man obsessed with legacy, with reputation, with controlling how people remembered him. Thomas wrote repeatedly about protecting the Carter name, but one entry stood out, a passage written in 1974, the year Michael Vale discovered his connection to the family. Thomas wrote, "Some truths create more destruction than lies." Investigators believe that sentence explained the foundation of the entire tragedy. The Carter family convinced themselves that hiding the truth was protecting people, but the secret did not disappear. It grew. It created resentment, fear, and eventually violence. The diary also revealed something nobody expected. Thomas Carter regretted abandoning Michael. Near the end of his life, he attempted to repair the damage. He secretly contacted Michael. He wanted to acknowledge him. He wanted to correct the inheritance records. But by then, Richard Carter had taken control. Richard believed admitting the truth would destroy everything the family had built, and he refused to allow it. That was the moment the family's secret became something more dangerous. It was no longer about hiding the past. It was about controlling the future. Investigators also discovered evidence that Evelyn had planned to expose everything publicly. She had contacted a journalist. She had prepared copies of the documents. She had scheduled meetings. She knew she was taking a risk, but she believed the truth mattered more than her own safety. The journalist, David Monroe, had kept a file on Evelyn for decades, a file nobody knew existed. Inside were notes from their conversations. David wrote that Evelyn seemed determined but scared. She believed someone was watching her. She believed someone was trying to find out what she knew. One note written 3 days before her disappearance contained a chilling observation. Evelyn says the family is not afraid of being exposed. They're afraid of losing control. That sentence became the final piece of understanding. The Carter family was not protecting a secret. They were protecting power. The case attracted attention far beyond Black Hollow. True crime researchers studied the investigation. Law enforcement agencies examined how old evidence could survive decades. And families of missing people across the country followed the story. Because Evelyn Carter's case represented something larger. A reminder that every forgotten file could contain an answer, Every old photograph could reveal a hidden connection. Every silent witness could hold a piece of the truth. But for the investigators who solved the case, the most difficult part was not finding the evidence. It was accepting how long the truth had been waiting. Detective Mark Holloway often returned to the basement of the old farmhouse before it was demolished. He said the place felt different after discovery. Not haunted, not cursed, just heavy. A place that had carried a secret for too long. He later described the case as a crime hidden behind normal life. Because nothing about the Carter family looked suspicious from the outside. They were respected. They were successful. They were involved in the community. They looked like the kind of family people trusted. And that was exactly why the secret survived. The investigation also changed the way Black Hollow viewed its own history. People began talking about the things they had ignored, the warnings they dismissed, the stories they considered impossible. Older residents admitted that Evelyn's disappearance had always felt wrong. They remembered the strange behavior of the Carter family. They remembered how quickly people stopped asking questions. They remembered how the town moved on too easily. And many wondered what could have happened if someone had pushed harder in 1986, if someone had demanded answers, if someone had refused to accept silence. The truth was painful, but it was also freeing. Because Evelyn Carter was no longer a missing person. Her name was no longer attached to an unanswered question. She was remembered as someone who searched for the truth, someone who challenged powerful people, someone who refused to let a lie survive forever. Michael Vale was remembered too. For decades, he existed only as a forgotten name, a person erased from family history. But the investigation restored his identity. It proved that he had existed, that his story mattered, that he had been more than a secret someone wanted hidden. Years after the case ended, a small memorial was placed near the former location of the Carter farmhouse. 2 names were carved into stone: Evelyn Carter, Michael Vale. 2 people connected by a truth that powerful people try to bury. The ceremony was quiet. There were no cameras, no dramatic speeches, only families, friends, and people from a town that had carried a painful memory for generations. As the final words were spoken, many residents looked toward the empty field where the farmhouse once stood, a place where a secret had survived for decades, a place where silence had once seemed stronger than truth. But silence had finally failed, because cold cases do not always stay cold. Sometimes they wait. They wait for new technology. They wait for new investigators. They wait for someone willing to ask the questions that others abandoned. And sometimes they wait for the truth to find its way home. The following story is entirely fictional. Any resemblance to actual persons, locations, or events is purely coincidental. The story of Evelyn Carter did not end when the evidence was found. It did not end when investigators uncovered the remains beneath the farmhouse. And it did not end when Black Hollow finally learned what happened on that freezing night in 1986. Because the final chapter of a cold case is never just about solving the mystery. It is about understanding the people left behind, the families, the witnesses, the communities forced to live with questions that had no answers. For nearly 4 decades, Evelyn Carter's disappearance existed like a shadow over Black Hollow. People grew older carrying memories they never shared. Children became adults hearing fragments of a story nobody wanted to explain. And the Carter name slowly became something people avoided saying, not because they forgot, because they remembered too much. After the investigation concluded, detectives began interviewing former residents who had moved away from Black Hollow years earlier. Many of them had left because the town had become connected to something they did not want to discuss. One former neighbor, Susan Miller, had lived across the road from the Carter farmhouse in 1986. For years, she refused interviews. She always said she had nothing important to add. But after hearing that Evelyn's remains had been found, Susan contacted investigators herself. She carried an old notebook, a notebook she had kept since the night Evelyn disappeared. Inside were small details, things she noticed, things she heard, things she never believed mattered. One entry from January 18th 1986 caught investigators' attention. Susan wrote, "Lights on at Carter House until almost 4 a.m. Too many cars. Something wrong." That information had never appeared in the original police reports. When investigators asked why she never shared it, Susan looked down. She said she was afraid. Not of Richard Carter. Not directly. She was afraid of what would happen if she was wrong. That sentence explained one of the biggest obstacles in the case. People often imagine secrets are protected by threats. But sometimes secrets survive because ordinary people convince themselves they are mistaken. They tell themselves there must be another explanation. They tell themselves someone else will speak. They tell themselves it is not their responsibility. And years pass, decades pass, until the truth becomes harder to ignore. The final investigation report revealed dozens of missed opportunities. A witness who saw the truck, a document that disappeared, a phone call that was never followed up, a family meeting nobody investigated. Each one was small. Each one seemed insignificant. Together, they created the wall that protected the truth. But when that wall finally collapsed, investigators discovered something else. The Carter family was not united. Behind the silence was conflict. Not everyone wanted to hide what happened. Some family members wanted to speak, but they were afraid of the consequences. One of those people was Caroline Carter. Her final interviews revealed the emotional damage caused by decades of secrecy. She admitted that she had spent years replaying that night in her mind. She remembered Evelyn walking into the farmhouse. She remembered Michael arriving. She remembered Richard becoming increasingly angry. But most of all, she remembered the moment she decided to remain silent. Caroline told investigators that after the confrontation, Richard gathered the family together. He told them the Carter name had to survive. He told them everyone had too much to lose. And everyone listened, not because they believed him, because they were afraid. Caroline admitted that silence became easier with every passing year. At first, she believed she was protecting the family. Later, she realized she was protecting a lie. The investigators asked her why she finally decided to talk. Her answer was simple. Because Evelyn waited long enough. Those words became the emotional center of the case. Because after decades, the investigation was no longer just about evidence. It was about a woman whose voice had been taken away. Evelyn had spent her final days trying to reveal the truth. And decades later, the truth finally spoke for her. The recovered notebook, letters, and recordings were placed into the official case archive. Future investigators would study them, not only as evidence, but as a reminder that every victim leaves behind a story, even when people try to erase it. The Carter case also changed the way Black Hollow viewed its own past. The town created a historical record documenting the investigation, not to celebrate the tragedy, but to remember the lessons, the importance of listening, the importance of questioning, the importance of taking every missing person seriously. Because in 1986, Evelyn Carter was treated as a mystery. Decades later, she became a warning that missing people are not forgotten stories. They are unfinished lives. They are families waiting for answers. They are names that deserve to be spoken. The farmhouse was eventually removed from the property. The basement where the evidence was discovered was gone. The walls that held the secret disappeared. But removing the building did not remove the memory, because the story was never about the house. It was about what happened inside people, the choices they made, the fear they accepted, the truth they ignored, and the moment when someone finally decided enough was enough. Years later, Detective Mark Holloway returned to Black Hollow one last time. He stood near the empty field where the Carter farmhouse once existed. He looked across a land where investigators had spent months uncovering pieces of the past. And he remembered the first day he saw Evelyn's photograph. At that moment, she was only a name in an old file, a missing person, a cold case. But after everything they discovered, she became something else. A woman who fought to expose the truth. A woman whose determination survived longer than the people who tried to silence her. A woman whose story proved one thing. Time can hide the truth, but time cannot destroy it. because somewhere something always remains. A forgotten photograph, a damaged recording, a handwritten note, a memory someone thought was meaningless. And when the right person finds it, the past opens again. The mystery that haunted Missouri for decades was finally solved. But the echo of Evelyn Carter's story remained. A reminder that behind every cold case is a person. Behind every headline is a life. And behind every silence, there is a truth waiting to be heard. The following story is entirely fictional. Any resemblance to actual persons, locations, or events is purely coincidental. The final report on the Carter investigation was placed into the archives, but for the people of Black Hollow, the case never truly became history. Some stories become memories. Others become warnings. The disappearance of Evelyn Carter became both. For decades, the town had carried the weight of an unanswered question. Where did she go? Why did nobody find her? Who knew the truth? Now those questions had answers. But answers do not always bring peace. Sometimes they bring a different kind of pain. The pain of realizing the truth was closer than anyone imagined. The people who had searched the woods, the volunteers who had walked the roads, the neighbors who had watched the farmhouse, they had all been looking in the wrong direction. Because Evelyn Carter had not vanished into the darkness surrounding Black Hollow. She had vanished inside a place that was supposed to represent family. A place that was supposed to represent safety. A place where people believed nothing terrible could happen. The old Carter farmhouse became a symbol of that betrayal. Not because of what happened there, but because of what happened afterward. The silence, the years of pretending, the decision by people who knew pieces of the truth to remain quiet. After the case became public, investigators received hundreds of messages from people across the country. Many were from families of missing persons, people who saw themselves in Evelyn's story, people who understood the pain of waiting, the endless questions, the impossible hope that one day a phone call would come, that someone would knock on the door, that an old mystery would finally have an answer. Detective Mark Holloway often said that the hardest part of cold cases was not finding evidence. It was keeping people from giving up, because time changes everything. Witnesses move away. Memories fade. Documents disappear. Buildings are destroyed. And sometimes the only thing left is a family refusing to stop searching. That was what happened with Evelyn. Her sister Rachel never accepted the idea that her disappearance would remain unanswered. For 37 years, she kept every photograph, every letter, every newspaper clipping, every small reminder of the sister she lost. When investigators returned the recovered photograph to her, Rachel held it for several minutes without speaking. The picture was damaged, old, faded, but it was proof. Proof that Evelyn had been there. Proof that she had lived. Proof that after all those years, she had not disappeared without a trace. Rachel later said the photograph represented everything the case had been about. Not revenge. Not anger. Truth. Because Evelyn had spent her final days searching for the truth. And decades later, that same search finally brought her home. But the investigation continued to reveal painful details about the Carter family. The more detectives examined the records, the more they discovered how deeply the deception had spread. The family had created layers of protection, legal documents, private agreements, false explanations, carefully chosen words. Nothing was accidental. Everything was designed to keep questions from being asked. One investigator described it as a puzzle where every piece had been deliberately moved. The evidence existed. The clues existed. But they had been separated, scattered, hidden among ordinary details. The family secret survived because nobody could see the entire picture until someone finally connected the pieces. One of those pieces came from an unexpected source. A handwritten map found among Michael Vale's belongings. The map showed the Carter property, but it also showed something else. A small marking near the edge of the woods. A place Michael had labeled with 2 words. Second proof. Investigators returned to the location. The area had changed dramatically over the years. Trees had grown. The landscape had shifted, but using the old map and modern technology, they located the exact spot. There, buried beneath layers of soil, they discovered a weatherproof container. Inside was another collection of documents. But these documents were different. They were not about inheritance. They were not about money. They were about people. Michael had documented conversations with former Carter employees, people who had witnessed unusual behavior, people who knew the family history was not what it appeared. The documents revealed that several people had attempted to expose the truth before Evelyn, but every attempt failed. Some lost their jobs. Some were threatened with lawsuits. Some simply walked away. Michael had been collecting these stories because he believed patterns mattered. One strange event could be ignored. Two could be explained. But dozens of people describing the same behavior told a different story. A story about control. A story about fear. A story about a family that had spent generations deciding what the world was allowed to know. The discovery of the second container answered one final question. Why did Evelyn trust Michael? Because they were not just investigating a secret. They were documenting a system designed to erase people who challenged the Carter family. The final evidence showed that Evelyn planned to release everything. She had prepared copies. She had arranged meetings. She had contacted people who could help. She was not running away. She was preparing for a fight. And that realization changed how investigators remembered her. For years, people had described Evelyn as a victim. But after the investigation, they described her differently, as someone who knew the risks, as someone who understood the danger, and as someone who chose truth anyway. The story of the Missouri 1986 cold case became more than a solved disappearance. It became a story about courage, about memory, about the power of unanswered questions. Because even after decades of silence, Evelyn Carter's final message remained clear. The truth does not disappear. It waits. It waits in forgotten files. It waits in old photographs. It waits in the memories of people who are afraid to speak. And sometimes, after years of darkness, someone finally opens a door. The following story is entirely fictional. Any resemblance to actual persons, locations, or events is purely coincidental. The discovery of Michael Vale's hidden container became the final piece of a mystery that had stretched across generations. But for investigators, the most shocking part was not what they found. It was what they realized had been hidden in plain sight. Evelyn Carter and Michael Vale had not been searching for a single answer. They had been uncovering a history built on secrets, manipulation, and a family name that mattered more to some people than the lives connected to it. The evidence collected from the second container was carefully examined. Every document, every handwritten note, every recorded statement. And slowly, investigators reconstructed the story of two people who had spent their final weeks trying to expose something they believed the world needed to know. Michael Vale had spent his entire life searching for an identity that had been taken from him. For decades, he believed his father had simply abandoned him. He believed his existence was something Thomas Carter wanted forgotten. But when he discovered the truth, he realized something even more painful. His father had not forgotten him. He had been forced to erase him. The difference changed everything, because Michael was no longer searching for a lost family. He was searching for the truth behind why he had been hidden, and Evelyn became the person who helped him find it. Investigators later discovered dozens of pages written by Evelyn during the final months before her disappearance. Unlike the earlier notebook pages, these writings were not emotional. They were organized, careful, almost like an investigation report. She documented dates, names, conversations, financial records. Every discovery was recorded. Every unanswered question was marked. And near the end of the notebook was a sentence that showed how much he understood the danger. I know they will try to make me look unstable. I know they will say I misunderstood. That is why the documents matter. Those words revealed Evelyn's greatest fear. Not that people would not believe her, but that people would believe the wrong story. A story created by the people with the power to tell it. For decades, the Carter family had controlled the narrative. They decided what was remembered, They decided what was forgotten. They decided which questions were acceptable. But Evelyn had started changing that. She had created a record that survived longer than the people who tried to destroy it. After the case was solved, investigators began studying how the original investigation failed. They discovered that early detectives had been influenced by assumptions. Evelyn was an adult woman. She had argued with her husband. She had a complicated family situation. Those details created a simple explanation. But simple explanations can be dangerous because they can cause investigators to stop looking deeper. The new investigation approached every detail differently. Every person was questioned again. Every statement was reconsidered. Every piece of evidence was examined without the assumptions of the past. And that was when the truth began to appear. The Carter family had relied on one thing more than anything else: time. They believed time would weaken the investigation. They believed witnesses would forget. They believed evidence would disappear. They believed people would eventually stop asking questions. For a while, they were right, but they never considered one possibility: that someone would continue searching, that someone would remember, that someone would refuse to let Evelyn become another forgotten name. The final months of the investigation brought another unexpected revelation. A former Carter employee named William Hayes contacted detectives. He was in his 90s. His health was failing, and he said he had waited long enough. William had worked for Thomas Carter and later for Richard Carter. He had seen the family's rise. He had seen the pressure behind the image, and he had witnessed the way Richard handled problems. William told investigators that Richard believed every problem had a solution: money, influence, silence. He never thought consequences applied to him, William said. He thought the Carter name protected him. William revealed that shortly after Evelyn disappeared, Richard ordered changes to the farmhouse: repairs, renovations, work that had no clear explanation. William remembered being told not to ask questions. He remembered seeing materials removed from a basement, and he remembered feeling that something was wrong. But like many others, he stayed silent, not because he approved, because he was afraid. His testimony helped explain why the case remained unsolved. There were people who knew pieces of the truth, but nobody knew the entire story. Everyone held one fragment, one memory, one suspicion. And without all the pieces together, nobody could see the complete picture until decades later. When technology connected what time had separated, the case eventually reached its final conclusion. The official findings stated that Evelyn Carter and Michael Vale were victims of a family conflict that escalated into violence. The evidence showed a deliberate attempt to hide what happened, a deliberate attempt to control information, a deliberate attempt to allow time to erase the truth. But time did not erase it. Time preserved it. Every year that passed created another chance for someone to find something: a forgotten file, a hidden letter, a memory, a clue. And eventually, those pieces came together. The story of Evelyn Carter ended where it began, at the old farmhouse outside Black Hollow, the place where two people walked in searching for answers, the place where a family's secret became a tragedy, and the place where decades later, investigators finally uncovered the truth. The farmhouse was gone. The family name had faded. The people responsible for protecting the secret were no longer able to control the story. But Evelyn's voice remained, not through a recording, not through a confession, through the evidence she left behind, through the questions she refused to stop asking, through the truth she believed was worth fighting for. And in the end, that was the message left behind by the Missouri 1986 cold case. A reminder that every missing person has a story, every unanswered question has a reason, and every secret, no matter how carefully protected, eventually finds a way out. The following story is entirely fictional. Any resemblance to actual persons, locations, or events is purely coincidental. For Black Hollow, the Carter case became more than a solved mystery. It became a scar. A reminder that the darkest secrets are not always hidden in abandoned buildings or forgotten places. Sometimes they are hidden inside families, inside conversations that never happened, inside memories people refused to share. And for the investigators who spent years rebuilding the story of Evelyn Carter and Michael Vale, the most difficult realization was simple. The truth had been there all along. It had been sitting in old boxes, written on forgotten pages, stored inside memories that people were too afraid to reveal. The case had not been impossible to solve. It had been protected. After the final investigation report was released, detectives continued examining every piece of evidence connected to the Carter farmhouse. One item received special attention: the cassette recording, the 4 minutes of audio that changed everything. Experts enhanced the recording several times. They isolated background sounds. They studied voices. They examined every second. And they discovered something hidden beneath the conversation. A second voice. A voice that had never been identified. Someone else had been inside the farmhouse that night. Someone who had never appeared in the original investigation. The discovery created one final mystery. Who else was there? Investigators returned to the timeline. They reviewed witness statements. They examined vehicle records. They searched old photographs from the Carter family archives. And eventually, they found the answer. The unknown voice belonged to Thomas Carter's longtime attorney, Leonard Brooks, a man who had represented the Carter family for more than 30 years, a man who handled their legal affairs, a man who understood exactly how valuable the family's secrets were. At first, investigators believed Leonard had been involved in the disappearance, but the evidence revealed something more complicated. Leonard was not the person who caused Evelyn's disappearance. He was someone who helped create the environment where it happened. He knew about Michael Vale. He knew about the hidden inheritance. He knew Richard Carter was trying to control the situation. And after Evelyn vanished, he helped organize the legal documents that protected the family. For decades, Leonard carried the burden of knowing. When investigators located his old personal files, they found a letter he had written but never sent. The letter was addressed to Evelyn's sister, Rachel. It was dated 1991, 5 years after Evelyn disappeared. The letter contained a confession, not to the crime, but to the silence. Leonard wrote that he had convinced himself he was protecting innocent people. He wrote that he believed keeping the Carter family together would prevent more damage. But over time, he realized the truth. He had not protected people. He had protected a lie. The letter ended with a sentence investigators later described as an emotional summary of the entire case. I thought silence would end the pain. I was wrong. Silence only gave him more time. Those words represented what happened in Black Hollow. Everyone who stayed quiet believed they were preventing disaster, but the silence became the disaster. The discovery of Leonard's letter also changed how investigators viewed the final hours of Evelyn's life. They realized she was not fighting against one person. She was fighting against a system built around secrecy, a system where everyone had a reason to look away. Richard had power. Caroline had fear. Leonard had loyalty. Others had dependence. And Evelyn had only the truth. But the truth was enough, because decades later it was still there, still waiting, still impossible to erase. The final years of the investigation focused on preserving Evelyn's story. Detectives collected interviews from everyone connected to the case. They documented every discovery. They archived every piece of evidence. They wanted future investigators to understand not only what happened, but why it remained hidden. The Carter case became an example of how cold cases are solved, not through one miracle discovery, not through one perfect clue, but through persistence, through people willing to look again. The first detectives in 1986 did not fail because they did not care. They were working with limited technology, limited information, and a community unwilling to tell the full story. Decades later, investigators had something different: time, technology, and people finally ready to speak. For Rachel Carter, the conclusion of the case brought a strange mixture of emotions. She had spent most of her adult life waiting for answers. She imagined many possibilities. She imagined Evelyn somewhere far away. She imagined a phone call. She imagined a reunion. But reality was different. The truth was painful. Yet it gave her something she had never had before: certainty. She no longer had to wonder. She no longer had to search. She finally knew where her sister's story ended. And she finally knew that Evelyn had never stopped fighting. The final memorial ceremony for Evelyn and Michael was held on a quiet autumn morning, the same season when the first evidence had been discovered. People from Black Hollow gathered together. Some came because they knew the victims. Some came because they remembered the mystery. Others came because they believed the story belonged to everyone. The memorial was simple: 2 names, 2 lives, 2 people who had been separated from the world for decades. But now they were remembered, not as a cold case, not as a headline, as human beings, as people who mattered, as people whose voices were finally heard. Years after the investigation ended, the phrase Missouri 1986 cold case became known far beyond Black Hollow. But for the people who lived there, it was never just a case. It was a lesson about the danger of silence, a lesson about the importance of asking difficult questions, a lesson that truth does not disappear just because people stop looking for it, because somewhere beneath every forgotten story, there is still evidence. Somewhere inside every unanswered mystery, there is still a voice. And sometimes, after decades of waiting, that voice finally gets heard. The following story is entirely fictional. Any resemblance to actual persons, locations, or events is purely coincidental. The years after the Carter investigation changed Black Hollow in ways nobody expected. The town that once avoided the subject began speaking about it openly. People who had spent decades refusing to mention Evelyn's name started telling their stories. Not because they wanted attention, not because they wanted forgiveness, but because they finally understood something they had ignored for too long. Silence had protected the wrong people, and every year that passed without answers had added another layer of pain for those who were still waiting. The Carter case became a reminder that justice does not always arrive quickly. Sometimes it arrives slowly. Sometimes it arrives after people involved are gone. Sometimes it arrives only after old photographs have faded, documents have turned yellow, and memories have become the only remaining evidence. But when it finally arrives, it changes everything. After the investigation closed, Detective Mark Holloway continued reviewing the case files privately. He wanted to understand one final question. Why did Evelyn Carter believe the truth mattered enough to risk everything? The answer was found in a collection of letters between Evelyn and Michael, letters written during the final weeks of their investigation. In one letter, Michael admitted he was afraid. He wrote that for most of his life, he had felt like a person who existed between 2 worlds. He had a name. He had memories. He had a family connection. But officially, he did not exist. The Carter family had erased him, but Evelyn refused to let that happen. She wrote back, "People can hide documents. They can hide money. They can hide the past. But they cannot change what happened." That sentence became one of the most important discoveries in the entire case, because it explained Evelyn's motivation. She was not searching for revenge. She was searching for recognition. She believed every person deserved to have their story acknowledged, even someone the world had been told to forget. Investigators later discovered that Evelyn had prepared multiple copies of the evidence. She understood the danger. She knew that if something happened to her, the truth needed another path to survive. She placed documents in different locations. She trusted different people. She created a trail that lasted longer than anyone expected. That trail eventually led investigators back to the Carter family property, back to the farmhouse, back to the place where the mystery began. The final examination of the property revealed even more details about what happened after Evelyn and Michael disappeared. Investigators discovered records showing that several changes were made to the farmhouse shortly afterward. The repairs, the renovations, the sudden cleanup. Everything happened within days. At the time, nobody questioned it. The Carter family explained it as normal maintenance. But decades later, the pattern was obvious. Someone had been trying to remove reminders of what happened, but they made one mistake. They believed the physical evidence was the only thing that mattered. They did not understand that people remember. They did not understand that fear leaves traces. They did not understand that secrets create their own evidence. The investigators who worked on the case described it as a puzzle where the missing pieces were never actually gone. They were simply separated. A neighbor remembered a vehicle. A worker remembered a renovation. A journalist remembered a conversation. A family member remembered a warning. Each person carried one piece. But nobody had the entire picture until the investigation brought everything together. The final report described Evelyn Carter as a person who unknowingly created the path that would eventually solve her own disappearance. Every note she wrote, every document she saved, every question she asked, it all survived. Her investigation continued even after she was gone, and decades later, detectives finished the work she started. For the Carter family, the aftermath was devastating. The reputation they had protected for generations collapsed. The businesses connected to the family disappeared. The properties were sold. The name that once carried influence became connected to one of Missouri's most disturbing mysteries. But investigators emphasized that the story was not about destroying a family name. It was about understanding what happens when people value reputation over truth. Because the Carter family's secret was not created in one night. It was created through years of decisions, small choices, small compromises, small moments when someone decided staying quiet was easier, and eventually those choices led to tragedy. The story also changed how missing person investigations were viewed in Black Hollow. The local police department created new procedures for reviewing old cases. Cold case files were digitized. Old evidence was preserved. New technology was used to examine forgotten materials. The department wanted Evelyn's story to create something positive, a reminder that no case should be considered finished simply because time has passed. Because time is not always the enemy. Sometimes time is the reason the truth survives. Years later, visitors occasionally came to Black Hollow to learn about the case. They expected a story about mysterious disappearance, but they discovered something deeper, a story about choices, about fear, about the consequences of protecting secrets. The empty field where the Carter farmhouse once stood became a quiet place. There were no signs, no tourist attraction, no public display, just open land. But for those who knew the story, the location carried meaning. It was the place where a family's secret was hidden, and the place where the truth finally returned. On the anniversary of Evelyn's disappearance, Rachel Carter returned there every year. She brought flowers. She brought old photographs. And she brought the one thing her sister had searched for until the end, the truth. She once said that for many years, she hated the question people asked, "What happened to Evelyn?" Because every time someone asked, it reminded her that nobody knew. Nobody had answers. Nobody could tell her where her sister was. But after the case was solved, the question changed. It was no longer, "What happened to Evelyn?" It became, "Who was Evelyn?" And that was the question Rachel wanted people to remember. Not the tragedy. Not the mystery. The person. A woman who loved her family. A woman who searched for answers. A woman who believed truth mattered. Because in the end, Evelyn Carter's greatest discovery was not the secret she uncovered. It was the proof that secrets never truly disappear. They wait. They hide. They survive. Until one day, someone finds them. Fictional true crime story. The following story is entirely fictional. Any resemblance to actual persons, locations, or events is purely coincidental. The final pages of the Carter investigation were not about what happened on the night Evelyn Carter disappeared. They were about what happened afterward. The years of waiting. The years of uncertainty. The years when a family carried the weight of a truth they refused to speak. Because solving a cold case does not simply reveal the past. It forces people to confront everything they spent years avoiding. And for Black Hollow, confronting the truth meant accepting something painful. The town had not been defeated by a lack of evidence. It had been defeated by silence. After the investigation became public, Detectives received hundreds of letters from people who had followed the case. Some were from investigators. Some were from journalists. Some were from families who had their own unanswered mysteries. But one letter stood out. It came from an elderly man who had never lived in Black Hollow. He wrote that he had spent years reading about missing person cases. He said most stories ended with questions, but Evelyn Carter's story was different because the truth had not been lost. It had been hidden. That distinction mattered. A lost truth requires discovery. A hidden truth requires courage. And courage was exactly what Evelyn had shown before she disappeared. The final review of her personal records revealed something investigators had not previously understood. Evelyn knew she was walking into danger. She knew the Carter family would fight to protect their reputation. She knew people would doubt her, but she continued anyway, because she believed some things were bigger than fear. Her final notebook contained one last entry. It was written only hours before she arrived at the farmhouse. The handwriting was rushed. The ink was darker, almost as if she had written it quickly. The message was simple. If I am wrong, nothing happens. If I am right, someone has to know. Those words became the final image investigators carried of Evelyn Carter, not as a victim, but as someone who made a choice to confront something powerful, a choice to challenge people who believed they were untouchable, a choice that changed Black Hollow forever. Years after the investigation ended, the detectives involved continued receiving questions about the case. Many people wanted to know why it took so long. Why did the truth wait 37 years? The answer was complicated, because time itself was not what solved the case. Time only preserved the pieces. The real reason the case was solved was because someone finally looked at those pieces differently. The photograph was always there. The letters were always there. The witnesses were always there. The clues existed. But for decades, nobody saw how they connected. That was the nature of cold cases. The truth could sit quietly for years, waiting for the right person, waiting for the right technology, waiting for someone willing to ask a different question. And in the Carter investigation, that question was not, where did Evelyn go? It was, who needed her to disappear? Once investigators asked that question, everything changed. The family secrets, the hidden documents, the missing records, the unexplained repairs, the silence. Every piece pointed back to the same thing, a desperate attempt to protect an image that was already broken. The Carter family spent decades trying to preserve a name, but names do not survive because people protect them. They survive because the truth behind them can withstand examination. The Carter name collapsed because it was built on something fragile, a lie, and lies require constant protection. They require people to remember what they are supposed to say. They require people to ignore what they see. They require silence. But silence is never permanent. Eventually, someone speaks. Eventually, someone remembers. Eventually, someone asks why. For Rachel Carter, that moment came too late. She never got the chance to hear Evelyn explain what happened. She never got the chance to see her sister walk through the front door again. But she finally received something she had wanted for decades. A place to put the pain. A name. A story. An answer. When asked what she wanted people to remember about Evelyn, Rachel did not talk about the case. She did not talk about the investigation. She did not talk about the Carter family. She simply said, she was brave. 2 words. But they described everything. Because Evelyn Carter was not remembered because she disappeared. She was remembered because she refused to disappear quietly. Her actions forced a secret into the light. Her evidence survived. Her questions survived. Her determination survived. And decades later, her voice was finally heard. The old farmhouse was gone. The basement was gone. The walls that held the secret were gone. But the story remained, because places can disappear. Buildings can collapse. Documents can fade. But the truth has a way of surviving. Sometimes it survives in a photograph. Sometimes in a forgotten letter. Sometimes in a memory of someone who finally decides they have carried the burden long enough. And sometimes It survives because one person refused to stop searching. The Missouri 1986 cold case was no longer a mystery. It was a reminder that every missing person leaves behind a story. Every silence has a reason. Every secret has a weakness. And no matter how many years pass, the truth is always waiting for someone to find it.